If it was possible, what do you think would be the effect of rejoining the customs union?
Rejoining the customs union might be nice, but actually it's not the most important thing. If you look at Norway, for instance, and I think I told you this last time, I went to Norway to do a documentary just before the referendum, on the grounds that all the people who wanted us to leave said we could just be like Norway, and I basically said we could be, but it wouldn't be as good as membership. And I got this abuse from all the Brexiteers saying, the nicest of which was, "Why are you such a lying shit, you lying shit?" And then the day after the referendum, Norway became treason. But even Norway does cut its own trade deals. It's in the single market, but it's not in the customs union, I believe. So you could rejoin the single market, would make a lot of sense. It's the obvious thing to do. It means we get immigration when we need it. It means we have access to the markets. It means people stop leaving the city of London because they can't move capital around. It means companies stop leaving the country because they can't get their goods into and out of Europe. It solves pretty much every problem. The customs union would be nice because it would just keep us more in lockstep with the EU. But you could stay outside and cut your own deals like Norway does. But having said that, the trade deals we've negotiated, there's two interesting facts about the trade deals. One is the ones with Australia and New Zealand, which were negotiated by Liz Truss, are absolutely appalling. And the EU has just negotiated its own one with Australia, which is immeasurably better than the one we managed. And that was because the Australians knew they had us over a barrel, that we were desperate for a trade deal, so they shafted us. British farming will be decimated by those trade deals. And we rolled over all the other ones we had with the EU, which I must admit I didn't think we'd be able to do quite so easily, but we did do it. And the one with Japan was an ever such a slight improvement on the one we'd had with the EU, but our trade with Japan has shrunk despite that. And I asked an expert on this, why was this? And she said, all the Japanese companies that used to do trade in Europe were based in London, so they moved all their profits from the EU into London and then to Japan, so our trade figures look very good. But they've now all moved their headquarters out of London, so our trade with Japan has gone down. So the trade deals which we have negotiated really are pretty useless. We'd probably be better in the customs union, but it's not the elephant in the room. The single market is the elephant in the room.
Why do you think there's so little actual discussion of these issues in the mainstream media?
There is a kind of issue in that so many of the kind of experts are drawn from a very narrow pool, and also the media is overwhelmingly interested in what is the philosophy of the people who are in power, because the opposition are not in power. So you can have an interesting discussion about what their philosophy is, but it's not going to affect anything. And so the battle was basically between the ultras and the One Nation conservatives. And John Major famously said of Portillo and Lilly and Redwood that it was better to have them in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. He should have just got rid of them. If he got rid of them then, it would have been a side story and nothing would have happened. But they basically took over the Conservative Party. And the second, they were protected and were utter shits and betrayed everyone and voted against everything, and they were allowed to stay in. And the second they got in, they got rid of everybody else who disagreed with them, just kicked them out. And so the debate has been moving further and further to the right because the Conservative Party, which was in power, has moved further and further to the right. And I just agree with people who say we shouldn't have the taxpayers' allowance on TV or radio, or the IEA, or the Adam Smith Institute, because we don't know who funds these people. They're just promoting the policies that millionaires are paying for them to promote, and we have no control over them. And if you got time, I'll tell you my favourite story about the Adam Smith Institute. Is I once did a piece on why inheritance tax is actually quite a nice idea, and lots of right-wing economists support inheritance tax. And so I contacted the Adam Smith Institute to interview them about that, because Adam Smith was in favour of inheritance tax. And the first question I asked was, what's your view on inheritance tax? And they said, we think it's disgusting, it's a double taxation, it's immoral, it should go. And I said, but Adam Smith was in favour of inheritance tax. And they went, no, he wasn't. And I went, yes, he bloody was. They didn't even know the policies of the person they named their organisation after. I mean, they just, these are just swivel-eyed loons, and they shouldn't be anywhere near power, but they are actually in power at the moment.
Why is it that the national press aren't highlighting the fact that the whole of this government and that the referendum, etc., was backed by dark money, by Tufton Street, by links with the neo-libertarians in America, etc., etc.? Or do they consider that Mr. Everyman wouldn't understand it anyway?
There have been some who have done that, you know, what's her name, Carol Cadwallader at The Guardian and so on. But the fact is that, you know, you can get away with a hell of a lot in a democracy. Trump proved that. You can just say, oh, well, you know, you know, we didn't break any laws. Our funding was legal. We take the advice of many people, including these people. They didn't have any influence on the referendum. And then, you know, 6 years down the line, you kind of go, well, should we have an investigation of this? And you kind of go, well, we could appoint a judge, and it will take a couple of years. And, you know, by then you've got away with it. And there's very little point in chasing after these people because the damage has been done. But to just take it on slightly, I think if there is a Labour government next, or a non-Conservative government, the things that need doing to fix this are not just economic. It is things like probity in public life and lying, and getting rid of the people who basically uphold morals in public life because they discovered that Priti Patel was a bully and then she was allowed to get away with it. The Prime Minister had parties, was allowed to get away with it. That the funding of political parties is a scandal. The funding of think tanks, which claim to be charities, is scandalous. The charity system needs reforming. Regulation of industry, especially utilities, needs completely changing. That would improve efficiency and growth overnight itself. The regulators have basically been, it's called regulatory capture. They've just been taken over by the companies they're supposed to regulate. The movement between the civil service and industry that they previously worked with is shocking. All these things have all contributed to this, and they've all got to go. But one government in one term can't do it all. They just won't have time to do all this. So you just have to admit that the people who lied, cheated, used foreign money, were basically doing Russia's work for it, got away with it.
Well, yes, I agree with what Jonty's just said about it's going to take more than 5 years to put all that right. But there is one thing that could be done on day one of a new government. And however that government's made up, and I sincerely hope it's made up of more than one party, as far as I can see, the Labour, Lib Dems, Greens and Scott Nats would do well to all commit themselves to one single manifesto commitment, and that is to revoke every attack that this government has made on democracy. And there's lots of them. It's buried in all these bills, but they've chipped away at democratic rights. And as you mentioned, they've undermined independent judiciary. They've attacked civil servants. And some of it's been done by changing the law. Yeah. A simple stroke of the pen would just revoke all those acts.
They restricted voters' rights now because you need to have ID. That's a deliberate policy
revoked, couldn't it?
To lower the left-wing vote. That's scandalous. You would reverse that overnight. You would reduce the voting age to 16. The House of Lords is now stuffed with liars, cheats, Russians, you know, anybody. I mean, in a moment, you can't take a title away from someone. I'd reverse that overnight. There were people who were appointed who lied to the commissioning, you know, to the bodies that are supposed to check whether you're entitled, you know, good enough to become a member of the House of Lords, and laughed about it afterwards. You just kick them all out.
It seems to me that as I say, it would be a long time to reform all the things that you talked about, but it's almost like a Martin Luther moment whereby we just want to nail these 42 charges onto a church door somewhere, and say, you know, if you elect if you kick this corrupt lot of people out, we will revoke the following things. And so it is. I'm not saying it's easy, but that is one simple thing that all the parties could do, and they could all write up to that, and it can be stuck in their manifestos.
You could make a good list of 10.
Yeah.
No, for instance, you just say, if you pump shit onto the beaches, you're going to prison.
Yeah.
You know, you just introduce proper environmental rules. The House of Lords, I think, is scandalous at the moment. But voters' restrictions are scandalous. Not appointing regulators who are supposed to check on the decency of politicians is scandalous. Lying to the House should be a criminal offence. You know, all these things. You could do a hell of a lot, and that all needs doing, because all this stuff, the purity of the cause of the Brexiteers meant they were willing to do anything. Lie to the Queen, prorogue Parliament, lie in elections, take foreign money, stuff the Lords, anything to get it through, because their cause was pure. That's what they thought, and this is where we're in. They did it once, and they thought, oh, it's okay, it's only because it's Brexit, and we're right, and we'll always be in power, so it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. They've massively undermined democracy and decency and rule of law and all kinds of things in this country, just to try and force this through. And they forced it through, and last week we found out what the consequences were. It's a disaster. I don't have any children, but I told my niece and nephew to leave the bloody country. So there you go.
Before the referendum, the EU was going to introduce, or has now introduced, measures to prevent tax evasion, to reduce money going off to tax havens. And there is a third item, which I always forget, but it's closely linked. Was that the cause of Cameron hurrying up his proposal to have a referendum?
No, I don't think it was. I think it was one of the reasons that some of the ultra right-wing hedge fund managers and similar people like that didn't like the idea of, because Britain is just a complete tax haven itself for money launderers and oligarchs, and if anything looks like it's going to happen here, they just move all their money to the Bahamas or somewhere else and start again. So it didn't help. I think it may have been an incentive to some of the sponsors of it. The reason Cameron did it was because he was an idiot. He thought he was finally going to lance the boil of Euroscepticism in the Conservative Party and cast the UKIPers into the void and stop them being such a pain in the arse and wasting his time and effort. And he lost because he was a complete amateur, because they were serious about it and he wasn't. The man who got elected leader of the Conservative Party because he lied about me being more Eurosceptic than David Davis, then tried to lead a campaign in which he said we had to stay in the EU. It was doomed. I was one of the few people, we had meetings at the BBC and everyone said, who thinks we're actually going to vote to leave? In the middle of the campaign. And I put my hand up and I said, yeah, we're voting to leave. And they went, we didn't think you were a Brexiteer, Jonty. And I said, I'm not a bloody Brexiteer, but I get out there and I know what people are thinking. And I know how this campaign's going. They're appealing to the anti-immigrants, the people who suffered under austerity, the people who think they haven't been listened to for years. They have got the perfect storm and they're going to win. And they did. They lied. They played the Enoch Powell race card. They were shameless. One of the reasons they were wrong is they had an answer to everything. Oh, we'll have a better deal than the single market. There isn't a better deal than the single market. We'll have more money coming back than we know what to do with. No, we will be free of all EU regulations and sail off into the sunset, and the euro will collapse, and they'll be jealous, and they'll all follow us. Balls, utter balls. And there's nothing you can do about it now. It's we can't rejoin at the moment. We can get a better deal, but we can't rejoin.
You mentioned, the various things like probity and public charity system changing, etc. Do you think there's someone, or I'd like to think more people in Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens, who are actually keeping a track of all the things that they need to reverse on day one?
I think you may well be right on that. What I always gives me a bit of comfort is when Tony Blair won his first landslide. There was all these things he said he'd do, and, you know, things can only get better, and da, 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 da. And he came in, and the first thing Gordon Brown did was give independence to the Bank of England, and we were all utterly shocked. And then we looked at it, and it was kind of hidden on page 63 of the manifesto with a vague reference to improving fiscal discipline. And he turned around and said, "Yeah, we meant independence for the Bank of England when we wrote that." And when you went, you didn't actually say that. But it was, a fantastic thing to do, because it immediately gave Labour government much more credibility with the markets, that the Bank of England would set interest rates and political interference in the economy had been removed. And it was a very, very smart act. Something like that, a commission on constitutional reform. And the problem with constitutional reform in this country is everyone thinks you need to reform the constitution, but no one can agree on how you need to change it. So nothing happens. I would just abolish the House of Lords.
I think that there is a groundswell among certainly all the pro-EU groups of PR, changing the upper house, devolution. And, if you look at Twitter feeds, okay, we're in our own bubble, but it just seems that is on the increase.
But you're right about the bubble. I'll just leave you the final thing about Twitter. It was in the BBC, we always used to say in meetings in the morning, what will people be talking about in the pub tonight? And that's the story you want to do. You've got to try and find the one that everyone will be interested in. And when Twitter came along, we all religiously followed Twitter, and we thought, oh, we can tell what people are going to be talking about in the pub tonight, because look, they're talking about it on Twitter. And that lasted for about 6 months until we realized we were all following each other. So we were just talking about what we were going to talk about in the pub tonight rather than what anybody else was. So we were in our own bubble. So yes, be careful. There are still a lot of people out there who you don't follow and I don't follow, who are ranting about how, the Guardian has destroyed the economy or something. And, we just don't hear them, but they're out there.